On the 28th of February, 2026, history did not just turn a page, it tore one out. What began as a high-stakes military operation by the United States and Israel against Iranian strategic targets detonated into something far more consequential, far more destabilizing, and far more personal than most analysts had predicted. Within hours of the first coordinated strikes, reports emerged that would fundamentally reshape the trajectory of the conflict. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, had been killed. And in the Middle East, symbolism is not a footnote, it is fuel. When Iranian state media confirmed the death of the supreme leader, the reaction was not contained to Tehran. It reverberated from Riyadh to Amman, from Doha to Abu Dhabi, from Washington to Moscow. Days of mourning were declared. Black banners were raised. The language of grief quickly gave way to the language of vengeance. Iranian officials warned that the response would be decisive, without leniency, without restraint. Within hours, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a statement that stunned even seasoned observers. The IRGC claimed it had launched what it called its most ferocious offensive in history against U.S. military installations across the Middle East, asserting that as many as 27 American bases had been targeted in retaliation for the killing of the supreme leader and the strikes on Iranian territory. 27 bases. That number alone was enough to electrify global newsrooms and military command centers. Whether fully verified or not, the psychological impact was immediate. It suggested not just retaliation, but orchestration. Not just anger, but planning. Missiles and armed drones were launched in rapid succession, arcing across borders toward installations identified as American or Allied. Targets were reported in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Jordan, a constellation of sites that collectively form the backbone of America's military footprint in the region. And suddenly, what had begun as a targeted joint operation had metastasized into a regional war zone. One of the most dramatic confirmed strikes occurred in Bahrain, where the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet came under attack. The Fifth Fleet is not a peripheral outpost. It oversees naval operations across the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and surrounding waters, one of the most strategically vital maritime corridors in the world. Videos from Manama showed air defense systems illuminating the night sky as interceptors streaked upward. Explosions echoed. Smoke rose near the naval complex. Even where intercepts were successful, the message was unmistakable. Nowhere was presumed safe. In Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base, a sprawling and critically important American air hub, was reportedly targeted by missile and drone waves. Air defense batteries activated. Coalition aircraft were secured or repositioned. The base, long considered one of the most fortified in the region, was forced into immediate defensive posture. Kuwait's Ali Al Salem Air Base followed. Radar systems tracked inbound projectiles. Interceptors were launched. Initial reports suggested that many threats were neutralized before impact, but again, the significance was not measured solely in physical damage. It was measured in strategic audacity. The United Arab Emirates Al Dhafra Air Base was similarly reported under threat. Defensive systems flared into action. The skies above Gulf capitals became theaters of streaking lights and controlled detonations, a surreal blend of advanced technology and ancient geopolitical rivalry. Simultaneously, reports circulated of additional launches toward Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Jordan. The pattern suggested coordination, not chaos. Multi-directional strikes, multiple countries, overlapping timelines. It was the kind of operational tempo designed to overwhelm defenses, to stretch resources, to introduce uncertainty at every level. And then there was the number again, 27 bases. Independent verification confirmed several key sites were indeed targeted. The full scope of the IRGC's claim remained difficult to substantiate in real time. But in war, perception can rival reality. Markets reacted. Insurance premiums for Gulf shipping routes spiked. Oil futures climbed on fears of prolonged instability. Airlines suspended or rerouted flights across vast swaths of airspace. Financial systems trembled at the possibility that what was unfolding might not be brief. Inside Washington, alarm turned into action. President Donald Trump convened emergency briefings. Satellite feeds streamed into the Situation Room. Military commanders assessed base integrity, casualty reports, and defensive capabilities across the region. Intelligence agencies scrambled to distinguish confirmed impacts from propaganda amplification. The administration faced a profound strategic dilemma. Escalate further and risk regional conflagration? Pause and risk appearing vulnerable? The killing of Iran's supreme leader had delivered a blow of historic magnitude, but it had also removed any illusion that this confrontation could remain limited. Allies responded unevenly. Some governments publicly supported the U.S. and Israeli strikes, citing long-standing concerns about Iran's missile and nuclear ambitions. Others urged immediate restraint, warning that the spiral of retaliation had already exceeded expectations. European capitals called for emergency sessions. Asian markets braced for energy disruptions. Saudi Arabia, which had cautiously navigated regional tensions in recent years, condemned Iranian strikes on Gulf territory and pledged coordination with allied states. Its leadership engaged in rapid diplomatic outreach, seeking to reinforce regional defense cooperation. Smaller nations hosting U.S. forces found themselves in an agonizing position, suddenly on the front lines of a war they had not initiated. For civilians across the region, geopolitics translated into siren. Families in Bahrain sheltered indoors as defensive systems roared overhead. In Qatar and Kuwait, emergency notifications flashed across mobile phones. In Israel, air defenses remained fully engaged amid fears of expanded retaliation. In Iran, grief and fury intertwined. State media portrayed the slain supreme leader as a martyr of resistance, framing the counterstrikes as sacred duty. The Revolutionary Guard's messaging was uncompromising. No target within operational range, it declared, would be off limits. Any further aggression would be met with continued counterattacks. The framing was existential, a defense of sovereignty against foreign violation. Yet, even amid relentless rhetoric and kinetic exchanges, verification remained complex. Not every claim could be immediately substantiated. Fog of war thickened the information environment. Analysts parsed satellite imagery. Governments issued carefully worded confirmations. Markets reacted to headlines before footnotes could catch up. For American service members stationed at confirmed target bases, the stakes were not abstract. Though many incoming projectiles were reportedly intercepted by layered defense systems, the risk remained tangible. Communications home carried undertones of uncertainty. Families watched news cycles that refreshed by the minute. Meanwhile, diplomatic channels did not entirely collapse. Quiet efforts at mediation began to emerge. International organizations urged ceasefires. Neutral states explored potential back-channel communications, but diplomacy struggles for oxygen when missiles are still in the air. The larger fear voiced by strategic analysts across continents was that this confrontation might not remain confined to state actors alone. The Middle East's complex web of alliances and proxy networks introduced additional layers of unpredictability. A miscalculation in one theater could ignite another. And through it all, the central fact remained. The killing of Iran's supreme leader had fundamentally altered the calculus. It transformed a military strike into a generational grievance. It reframed retaliation as obligation. It shifted the psychological terrain from deterrence to defiance. As night settled over the Gulf, skies that had glowed with interceptors grew temporarily quiet. But the silence felt provisional, not permanent. Governments worldwide remained on high alert. Defense planners recalculated. Energy markets held their breath. Citizens across the region lay awake, listening for the next siren. The claimed strikes on 27 bases, whether fully confirmed or not, had already achieved one undeniable outcome. They shattered the assumption that military infrastructure across the region was insulated from broad retaliation. They redefined what escalation could look like in an era of drones, precision missiles, and instantaneous communication. What happens next will depend on choices made in rooms far from public view, strategic calculations, whispered negotiations, assessments of cost versus consequence. It will depend on whether escalation continues its upward trajectory or whether restraint, however fragile, finds a foothold. For now, the Middle East stands suspended between fury and fatigue, between vengeance and survival. Each actor believes it is justified. Each government claims necessity. Each family hopes the next headline does not carry a name they recognize. The events that followed the death of Iran's supreme leader are more than a sequence of military exchanges. They are a stark illustration of how quickly stability can fracture once the machinery of war is engaged, how rapidly symbolism can transform into strategy, how fragile the balance between deterrence and devastation truly is. History will remember the 28th of February 2026 not simply as a day of strikes, but as a day when escalation leapt forward in ways few fully anticipated. The consequences are still unfolding. The calculations are ongoing. And the world watching, anxious, Uncertain waits to see whether this chapter expands further or finally, mercifully, begins to close. The second chapter of this crisis is where the scale and intensity of the 28th of February 2026 truly crystallize. In the hours and days following the initial strikes and the killing of Iran's supreme leader, the region became a tinderbox, with each missile launch, intercepted projectile, and defensive alert layering tension upon tension. Confirmed reports showed multiple U.S. military bases across Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq came under attack, while other alleged strikes remained unverified but no less impactful in shaping global perception. Civilian populations were drawn unwillingly into the calculus of war. Families in Gulf cities sought shelter. Airports were closed or rerouted, and the rhythms of daily life were disrupted across an already volatile region. At the same time, Iran's narrative framed its actions as not only retaliation, but also as an assertion of sovereignty, signaling that any future foreign incursion would carry consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield. The psychological effect of claiming strikes on 27 bases, whether fully realized or partially symbolic, sent shockwaves through Washington, military planners, and allied governments worldwide. Analysts scrambled to parse reality from propaganda. While markets reacted instantly to the uncertainty, energy prices surged, defense stocks fluctuated, and insurance premiums for shipping in the Persian Gulf rose sharply. In the United States, President Trump and his national security team faced a brutal dilemma: escalate further in response to the unprecedented attacks, risking a broader regional war, or pause to reassess strategy, which could be interpreted as weakness. Both options carried enormous stakes for military personnel, civilian populations, and the credibility of American global power. Washington scrambled to fortify bases, deploy additional defensive assets, and coordinate with regional partners, while behind-the-scenes diplomacy quietly sought avenues to de-escalate a conflict, already spiraling beyond traditional containment. Israel, too, remained on high alert. Air defense systems were continuously active, reserve forces were mobilized, and strategic facilities prepared for continued Iranian attack. The possibility of prolonged confrontation, involving proxy actors and regional alliances, loomed large. The battle had already demonstrated that modern warfare in the Middle East is not confined to borders. It is a multi-directional, rapid, and psychologically charged engagement that stretches across national and political lines. Amid the chaos, global actors expressed both concern and urgency. European, Asian, and regional governments called for restraint, warning that any misstep could escalate the conflict beyond the Middle East. Economies dependent on oil and trade watched nervously, knowing that even a short-term disruption could ripple worldwide. Meanwhile, public sentiment oscillated between fear, anger, and confusion, reflecting the human cost of strategic decisions made in distant command centers. By the end of the initial wave of strikes, one reality was undeniable. The Middle East had entered a new phase of instability. The death of Iran's supreme leader had transformed a targeted military campaign into a regional confrontation, one that challenged assumptions about deterrence, safety, and the limits of escalation. Diplomatic efforts, while ongoing, faced the enormous challenge of bridging a gap created by decades of mistrust, compounded by immediate kinetic action and nationalistic fervor. For U.S. military planners, the attacks revealed vulnerabilities even in highly fortified bases, and underscored the importance of rapid adaptation, intelligence integration, and alliance coordination. For Iran, the ability to strike multiple strategic targets, whether fully confirmed or partially asserted, demonstrated a willingness to project power and influence the global narrative. For civilians across the region, it was a stark reminder that in modern warfare, borders and policies matter less than the trajectory of missiles and the unpredictability of conflict. As the dust settled, the world realized that the 28th of February 2026 would be remembered not just for the initial strike, but for the immediate and dramatic escalation that followed. The targeting of U.S. and allied bases, the rapid retaliatory operations, and the psychological weight of Iran's claims all reshaped the understanding of modern military engagement in the Middle East. What had begun as a calculated operation to neutralize perceived threats had grown into a broad confrontation with implications for regional stability, global security, and the lives of countless civilians. The aftermath of these events is a landscape of uncertainty. Decisions made in command centers, negotiations whispered in quiet halls, and the courage of ordinary people navigating extraordinary circumstances will collectively shape the next chapter. For the world, the lesson is stark. Peace in regions of deep historical tension is fragile. Deterrence can be quickly challenged, and once the instruments of war are unleashed, controlling their trajectory becomes an immense, high-stakes test of strategy, diplomacy, and human resilience. The reverberations of February 28 will be felt for months and years. A vivid reminder that in an interconnected world, local actions can have global consequences, and that the choices made in those moments of crisis define not only the present, but the shape of history yet to come.